All right. Hey, everybody. It's Ashley and Joe Kovacs here, and we're here for the THROvacs Podcast. This is where the THROvacs family and throwing collide, and we're coming to you guys live from Hawaii. So we've been here for the last couple podcasts, and we've been doing our training sessions here, and we're wrapping it up. So, Joe, how do you think it's been going so far for us?
I mean, I think there's definitely a point last week we're a little sad because, coming to an end, reality is about to happen. But, I think that's a good sign that you made a good decision by coming here. That means the training is, turned a page from just moving in the ring to now kind of throwing, starting to whip the ball. So overall, I'm really, really happy about this trip. But most of all, because of kind of like the family moments that we had and being able to kind of do this work trip and enjoy it. I think that's one of those things as I'm getting later in my career that I'm really appreciating more than ever.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that, we've said this a few times since we started doing this here that, for us, it's like we don't really get a summer vacation because the summer is monopolized by the job. And obviously my role with you, I'm traveling with you too. And it's been different since we've had our kids. They just turned 2.5 about a week ago. So this is kind of a time for us to almost have like a family summer vacation, but it's also 100% a training camp. Like it's not like we're here and we're in the lap of luxury with, not doing our chores. Like we're still doing laundry, we're still cooking, we're still training, we're still working, and so I think that's one of the things about it that's been awesome. But like we are tired because it's been like the turn of a page for the preseason training, and I think that's all been going really, really well. So I think for me, one of the things that has come to my mind over the last few weeks is the thought and the idea of discussing focus. So how do we focus on our job and also focus on our family and also focus on all the other logistical things we have to do? Everybody kind of knows by now we have a couple other business entities, Kovacs Capital. We have our THROvacs stuff where we're doing camps and I'm doing some online consultation with coaches and athletes. How are we able to focus on all of these things at once? I think that that's something we kind of touched on a little bit when it came to balance. But I think that today a good topic of conversation would be how do we lock in and focus to get everything we need done at the caliber we expect to be done at. So what comes to your mind when I say that?
The first thing for me when you think focus is, I think like, especially at the scale we're at, right? I mean, you can watch some of these like crazy CEO talks and they talk about delegating and stuff like that, but we really don't have anybody else to get to delegate our tasks to at this point
Right.
than ourselves. Of course, we have some help with, real estate. We have some really good people who advise us and help us along the way, and our realtor, Lori, who's, been at our sides this whole time, but it's not like we can just pass on the job. And I think that's one of the most important things of when we talk about our focus. It's about, kind of finding a way to get the job done when it needs to get done. And there's a priority. There's a different time of year where my throwing is the ultimate priority because it has the greatest outcome in terms of performance. And then there's a time of the year that like I need to grow my body and recover. And because the throwing's not a priority, we can kind of focus on other priorities, like maybe the real estate portfolio, maybe it's some of the marketing stuff we're doing, maybe some of the camps and coaching you're doing as well. So I think this kind of ebb and flow of prioritization and like time of year and preparation, I think is how we try to, you know, I don't know how you're going to say it, but how I think we focus the best. Like, what do you think is kind of maybe our blueprint?
Well, I think that one of the things that I've said before is I think everybody's skill set or everybody's strong suit is kind of their greatest asset can also be their greatest weakness. So I think that one of the things that I've been good at in my life is being able to focus when I need to, like the things that I'm interested in, I can really focus on. But I think that one of the things when you're younger, you can kind of go all in thinking about one thing, and that's fine. But as you get older and you have more responsibilities and more things on your plate, you can't just give 100% every single bit of energy, focus, emotion, attention to one thing singularly. So the way that you were probably able to focus on throwing when you were living at the Olympic Training Center versus the way that you can focus on it now when we have two 2-year-olds versus the way you could even think about it when I was coaching collegiately, it's all shifted and changed. So how would you say that you've been able to maintain focus on throwing for as long as you have?
I think in terms of focus for throwing in like all these years, like I've never been able to do it the same. Like the motivations every single year is different, the circumstance is different, but like essentially the tools and the kind of the maybe call like the formula of like if you think about the math equation, like, you know, whatever X is, X equals medal, X equals payday, X equals bonus. I think that's one of the things where I always work my way backwards from. Like what is it going to take at USA's to make the team? What's it going to take to get a medal? What's it going to take to win? What's it going to take here? And like I need to make sure I'm in that shape. So I can kind of I always kind of go, the farthest you can in terms of where you think you need to be and you work your way backwards. And that's how I can think that in my years I've kind of kept my focus, if you call it that way, of like there's a circumstance of like if I'm in May and the ball's not going at least this far, the reality that in a month from now where USA's is going to be that it's going to have a 2-3 meter jump is delusional,
Right.
right? So there's a point where you're keeping yourself accountable to what you've done before in the past, what the formula was, where it needs to go, if it needs to get even more focused or if you're working on something technically. So I think that's something for me that I always work my way backward from the problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think this topic is so loaded because it's like even thinking about focus in general for throwing, it's like, how do you focus on throwing? Like that is a loaded question in itself. Like, when do you focus on the body? When do you focus on the technique? What do you focus on day to day? Like, what is the intention of every single session? What is the intention of every single throw? And I think that that's where things get really crazy because there are so many small little facets involved when it comes to throwing that it's like, how do you see the forest through the trees sometimes? Meaning like, okay, I know I need to be in shape to throw 2275 at USA's to feel like I have a very strong chance of making the team. Just say that, for example, like maybe it's shooting a little bit high, maybe it's not, you never know. But how do you work your way back from 2275 at USA's, which USA's is not a standard time every single year? As most of the people who are listening to this podcast know, USA's changes every single year, basically, depending on when the major is. So this year, we all know that the major is the last meet of the year, which is cool. But because of that, now USA's are in August, the first week in August, whereas before, I mean, we've had USA's as early as June, right? And so how do we stay aligned with the plan when this time scale and like the amount of time you have between meets, between championships is ever changing? I think that's one of the things focus wise that's been interesting in the last few months is like comparing this March to last March, this April to last April. It's a completely different time of the year for where you're at in your training. So, and also it's like now that the major's so far back, other people have started to compete. There was kind of a long indoor season. How do you stay focused on what you're doing and where you're at in your preparation when everybody else around you is kind of doing something different?
Yeah, I think it's this is where you have to kind of think macro and micro. I mean, like there's people have their decisions to choose to do what they want to do, and you can't get caught up with, results or what's happening because if you stick to the plan, like if you have the macro plan that we're, trying to be ready, and ready is obviously, relevant to where you want to be. For me, making the team, getting a medal, that relevancy, that plan is in place, regardless of what's happening in the world. Now, of course, you can't tune out and see who's throwing, who's not throwing, who's going to go to this meet and that meet, maybe speculate what you would have done at those, if you had the opportunity to be there. But I think it's all about kind of sticking to your plan. And I think one of those things when you were saying focus earlier, especially when you were talking about like throwing and, particularly throwing and not just life stuff, it's like there's a time of the year where you and I are talking about what I'm doing in the ring, right? And there's a focus on that. But then there's a time of the year when you're just focused on being a competitor. Like I mean, there's always gonna be some cues you're thinking of. There might be probably less than 3 in the actual meet, but
Mhm.
like you're not getting coached at the meet.
Right.
Your focus isn't on where you put your right foot, where you put your left foot.
Right.
Your focus is on executing. And there's a whole different, maybe I call it flipping the switch, but there's a different mindset that goes on to that type of focus because you're taking away the X's and O's and you're becoming a performer on that stage. So that when you say focus to me is probably the most important thing is because there's these different phases that you can do the exact same thing every single day, but the way you're doing it and the intent you do
Well,
it
I
is
think
completely
that
different.
that's something that you see in other people. Like I see that pretty easily where I see somebody and they're throwing at a certain level and everything looks choppy. And you can tell they're thinking their way through the throw and it looks just all around rough. And then you see people that are kind of in these like competitive flows where everything looks faster. You can tell they're not thinking. You can tell they're more on that autopilot competitive mode. And I think that, some of the meets we've seen recently, early season, you can tell the people that have had an indoor season where they've kind of polished up, the people this is their first meet of the year and they haven't competed since
Mhm.
the Diamond League final or whatever it may be. And you can tell like everybody is in a different point of their year. And then by the time you get farther along into the championship, it's like everybody only has this meet left or that meet left. So everybody's kind of in their competition as close as they can be to their competition flow. So these early season meets are really interesting. I think it's interesting to see what other people are probably focusing on right now because everybody does not have the same quote unquote intentions in April, right? Like you're sitting here right now, you know, 9 hours away from the continental United States and other people are at track meets. So it's like you're not doing the same thing as they're doing, right? But you guys are all trying to do the same thing
Well,
in August.
no, I think it's a good point, and I think it also has to do with your past and your resume, and like, I remember being a young athlete, and you had to do something pretty substantial in the early season to guarantee yourself a spot in the Diamond Leagues, to guarantee yourself a spot in those meets. Obviously, with my resume of my past and a bunch of medals in the years, like I have I know I can go to any meet I really want to, right?
Right.
And I don't say that to be cocky as much as that's just the reality of how track and field works. So I can kind of, if you call it slow play or wait, like I don't need to have, there was a point in the year, I remember, I mean, I think Art was 100% right for this when he used to have me have a huge opener and I never understood why, but he really, really kind of targeted that. But I know his intent was if I opened with that big mark, then we could relax because we knew what the schedule was. I knew
Right.
I was in every Diamond League, but I wanted to.
Yeah.
We can make a plan then, but you can't make a plan to winning the Diamond League final, go into the major, go into the national championships if you're just puddling around training all day and nobody sees that result. So I think it's a different path for everybody. Luckily, at this stage of my career, going on year 13, I've done every path probably multiple times. So I'm glad that, it's one of those things I reflect on the focus that like what, as an old guy, like I think the young guys should be doing these meets. I think some of them shouldn't be. I can kind of see those decisions that I've made in my career and like I can see why they're doing what they're doing.
Yeah, that makes sense for sure. I mean, I think that, the point of everybody kind of has a different intention for why they're doing what they're doing, and everybody needs to stay the course of what they think is important makes a lot of sense. This is an individualized schedule. It's not like everybody has to go to the same meets. Really, anybody can do whatever they want as long as you show up to make your team.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that, like, it's interesting for me because, you know, we'll probably have a whole nother topic on advice. I think that's one thing I want to talk about in the future. But like when I am answering questions, I'm answering from my perspective as a professional, right? And that season. But I think probably most of our listeners probably would benefit more from you talking as a collegiate coach in your past because the sense of urgency is completely different. And I used to say that to Ashley's athletes all the time, like, what I'm saying to you is probably right, but it's not as right and as needed as what Ashley's telling you because her sense of urgency is for the Big Ten championships, or maybe even to get you on the bus because you haven't earned that spot yet. So what I'm saying in these grandiose theoretical ways might be correct, but when you talk about focus for you, I think that's one thing I remember you with the collegiates, the focus you had to have going into the season of getting on the bus, having your coach, your head coach want to have that person out there. Like, what do you think for a collegiate athlete, sophomore right now, listening, who's on that bubble, is not an impact player yet, but wants to kind of get over the hump?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of almost similar to what we're talking about with the professional ranks. Like a person that's just trying to break into the scene and make it to the Diamond League meets doesn't have the same path to get there as you do. And I think that that's something that is unique in the college system. And I think good coaches understand that not everybody is doing the same exact thing. Like clearly they're not. And it's really important to understand, like, where, like you said from the beginning, where you're at and where you want to be and kind of work your way back. So if I had a kid that was a walk-on kid that I just really hoped that they could have the opportunity to go to the conference championship, what they needed to do and when they needed to be ready and when they needed to show up was different than somebody that I knew after the first meet of the year was going to have an automatic bid to go to NCAAs, right? Like you take one throw and you're going to be top 16 in the country and it's going to hold all year.
Mhm.
That's a different situation, right? And so I think that just you have to kind of be on the same page with everything. I think that's another thing about focus that I wanted to talk about. for you and I, because our situation is so unique, whereas we live together, we're with each other legitimately 24 hours a day, every single day, which I know some people probably think that's crazy because they think about being around their spouse that long and they would just can't imagine what that's like. But I mean, we've always been this way, and I mean, I wouldn't really have it any other way. That's how we are, right? So I see you every day. I know what's going on with you every day, and we kind of have to align our focus in order to do this the right way, and not only just with the track stuff, but also with the life stuff. So I think that as a collegiate, having a coach where you guys are on the same page and you're focusing on the same thing, like these are the intentions I have for myself this year. These are the intention coach has for me this year. And then aligning your focus in training to meet these little mini goals or, a mesocycle of what you're trying to do. Everybody's got to kind of be on the same page. And if you're not, then it's not going to work.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's important to say is like that grand plan. I think there always has to be this macro view of like whether, I think that's why every athlete has some excitement in the beginning of the year where you can kind of like look at like the final recipe, what you want to make, right? Of course, the grind to get there is always tough, but I think it's in terms of focus, I think those things are what have year 13 as a pro for me, like gives me a little bit of boost in the off season. It's just like, okay, I never want to do it the same, whether it's mentally, physically, and like what what are you going to do different? What's what Judd Logan used to tell you, 90%.
You'd say 90% of what I do stays the same every year, and I spend 90% of my time trying to figure out that next 10% every year.
No, I think that's impactful because you can be at the top of the game, you can be the top of the world, wherever you are, it's all relative to that point in history. But by the next year, it's already gone. And I mean, and like, not to sound bad, but like I always we'll ask somebody, who won NCAA's 3 years ago, and most people can't answer, right? And I think that's maybe not the best thing for our sport overall because it is so fleeting. But you can even ask, I mean, heck, you and I went to a shot put conference that was all about the shot put. And one of the trivia answers was, who is this woman who won the shot put? And it was 2000 or 2004. And I think one person got it right.
Yeah, that's
So, I
crazy.
mean, it is what it is, right? That's what it is. And so for me, that's a big perspective of like what you think is such a big deal now, tomorrow is not. And that's when you have the opportunity to try to make yourself as good as you can today. You have to have the focus to do what you need to do, but also not get caught up so much in the negativity and the ups and the downs as much as where you're going to put that next step forward.
Well, it's very much, we've talked about this before. It's a very much what have you done for me lately sport. And I think that that's how a lot of things are, and that can really hurt people's feelings, or they can just come to the realization that that's like kind of like how life goes. And it's really like that in like any profession, like who's hot is who's hot. If you're in sales and you're the one that's selling the most every month, like you're hot, you're hot. And it might not be the guy that's been the best salesperson overall for the last 15 years. That's how it goes. And you have to understand that there are things that have to be happening to stay up with that. So that's where that Judd quote is really awesome because you have to have the first 90% right to be able to have that to be your cornerstone. So like I love what he said, 90% of what I do stays the same every year. That means that like like this is my tried and true. This is what I do and this is what I know works. But like what can I do for this last little 10%? What can I change? How can I make it better to make it overall more impactful than it's been? And I think that that's, as a coach, a really awesome way to look at it. And I trust coaches that have that mentality because you stand strong in what you believe in that 90%. And I think that the coaches that I've had in my past and the mentors I have, that's kind of been their approach. Like you don't see them coming up with like a completely different plan every single year. They have, this is my structure, this is how I do things. And I think there's been some discussion of like, these people that are so dependent on their systems, quote unquote systems, and how you shouldn't be and you should always be evolving. And like I 100%, I know you need to be evolving. Everybody needs to be evolving every single year. But at the same time, like if you're the type of person that is always changing and always trying to find next, that also does not seem like something that you can trust because it's almost really like you don't believe in what you're doing and you're always trying to find kind of like that next best thing in order to make your situation and make your system better.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's important to say because I'm glad you said that because that's what I was going to ask you next is like the struggle of that 10%, the all encompassing, you go to bed thinking the idea. You need to do something, whether it's track involved or not, right? That's what you're spending your time on. What would your recommendation to be other coaches, other athletes, high school coaches on, sometimes that 10% is almost tailoring to the athlete. You have somebody with longer leverage, or maybe they have more natural strength in here. So it's a little bit different than you're doing with the rest. But sometimes it's that next little edge, that next little step of advancement. What's your recommendation to high school athlete, high school coach right now, club coach, who has that guy who's going to be like, hey, he's good for his school, but now he wants to be good for his region, make states. Where is the best direction? Is there a formula that is can help some people avoid the potholes?
I think that so much of this at a higher level needs to be customized. Like in the college system, you don't really have the luxury of everybody doing something completely different. And maybe you do, but like for the way that I ran things, it's not like every single person was doing something completely different. But I will say that I treated everybody or spoke to everybody in a way that I thought was going to be most impactful or most advantageous for their growth and development. So I knew everybody's motivation was different. And for me, part of the thing that I was always trying to do is find a way to get the most out of every single person I could. So it looked different. The conversations were different. The conversations around motivation were different, right? And not to say everybody was throwing different workouts every single day, but people were doing different things. And I think that like that 10% needs to be sort of customized in a way, right? And I'm not even just talking like physically or like the implements they're throwing, but also just like the way that the coach is interacting with the athlete. That needs to be tailored. And I think that like sometimes you see with athletes, especially professionals, like they'll get with a coach that kind of stimulates a different side of them emotionally or gets them to think about things a little bit differently, than they have a spark, right? In the same way, you could see a kid that made a coaching change and maybe it's not necessarily working out and they miss the coach that they had before that kind of like they had the ability to motivate them a little bit differently. I think that stuff really does make a difference. And I think again, like to bring it to the idea of focus, it's like being able to focus in on somebody to help bring the most out of them. So when you have to focus your attention on like 30 people, it's a little bit harder to kind of get into the weeds and kind of get to know somebody like that. So when you see some of these professionals that have changed their situation, they work with a different coach, or maybe it's somebody that's able to give them a little bit more time and attention, you see them kind of get a spark. I think that that's something that we've seen that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, I think that's important to say too when it comes into. I mean, one of the things that we say whenever we have a camp is just like the first thing we say is just like, whatever you hear today, do not go home and tell your coach, oh, Joe and Ashley Kovacs told me this, you're wrong, you're doing it this way. Because like that's never the intent. And I don't think that's not right. Right. And I think one of those things when you do get a new coach or a new perspective, and that's exactly what it is. It's a new way to look at things in terms of maybe I'm saying the exact same thing as what your coach has been telling you for 4 years, but the way I said it kind of clicks a little differently. But I think I've had coaching changes throughout my career, and I think back, but like every one along the way unlocks the
Mhm.
door more, some more than others, right? And some in a way that like maybe not be directly, right? It may not
Well,
have
you
helped you.
might even have somebody that just that doesn't work and you know it's not right, you know? I mean, not every single person like, again, you get coaching changes, like, you had a ton of them in college, and you have a coaching change, and you're kinda subject to whoever the head coach decides to bring in. It might be good, it might be bad. You might stay because you're almost done with your degree, or you might stay because, like, whatever reasons you have, or you might leave, you know? And it's like, you have to make a decision. Like, if you leave, you're thinking, like, "This isn't what I wanted," or, "This isn't, like, the situation," or, "This person maybe isn't like who I would have chosen myself," or maybe it is, but either way, you learn something. You learn like, "Hey, the coach I had before, I think really was the right choice for me," or maybe you learn like, "Hey, I liked that coach, but I also like this coach what this coach is doing." You see that all the time too. You know, you see plenty of coaches that come in and there's a boost, you know, we've talked about that a lot before. I think that one of the major things that I see with young athletes is they're focusing on the wrong things. So it's very common, obviously, like even at the level that we're at, it's very comparative, right? This is a comparative sport because it's all about numbers. So people go out and even from the very beginning, the first time you ever do the sport, you're thinking, how do you know you're good? Well, you know you're good by comparison. You're comparing what you just did at this dual meet. Oh, I threw 30 feet and I won, or oh, I threw 23 feet and I got seventh or eighth or whatever the case may be at your Tuesday night dual meet. It's like it is you learn how good or not good you are at the sport by comparing yourself to others. So you don't really start out with the best measuring stick of like how to judge yourself in a sport like this. And I think that when the kids get to college and they think that it's going to be the same way that it was in high school, and they don't realize that the focus on what you do every day needs to change from just seeing how far you can like chuck something out there to being more in tune with your body and yourself and your throw, shifting the focus to a little bit more mature evolution is not something that's always the easiest thing for young athletes to do.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things why once a lot of athletes who do have some success, there is a little bit point of like that, I don't want to call it depression of like, there's like a point when you think you were good and then you look to the next step, right?
Right.
And they say what comparison is the thief of joy. And that's a great quote because I think,
Definitely.
what we talked about in our perspective podcast, like what you did to get a medal today might not get you on the team at US championships, right? It might be the exact same mark, right? So that's where it has to kind of, the hardest thing is you have to kind of keep it on your individual. Like you make yourself a centimeter better every day, you'll be a world record holder before anybody. Like that's obviously maybe impossible to do, but having that kind of mentality of kind of focusing on your craft, like an artwork, focusing on it, like you are building something internally, I think to me is probably the most impactful thing I've learned in my career, because especially the beginning of my professional career, it was very externally driven of like beating this person, taking this person down. I want to find a way and prove people wrong, right? The narrative that Joe's too small, blah, 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 or Joe's
Short.
short, like all these things. I mean, I was a little smaller then, not like I am now, but there's a lot of just narratives of like, he doesn't know how to win. I heard that all the time. He's not a winner. It's true. I wasn't, right? So like that motivation, chip on the shoulder, was what propelled me externally, all the outside. There's definitely a point in my career where like somehow inversely kind of quickly it flipped, right? And it's just like, maybe that's the point of the career where I wasn't really sure if I was going to keep on throwing or not, what the next steps were. But like for sure at this point of the career, it's kind of more internally driven. Of course, external matters are very important in terms of medals and money. That's, you know, you don't want to go to the major championship and be proud of yourself and you are capable of getting a medal, but you didn't. And that's the way I feel. I know that's something I'll never be able to sit with. Right. So there's still the external part of the accomplishment because that is the sport, but there's more of an internal drive to what can I do? What do I want to do? How do I want to do it? How do I want to leave it? I think those are the things that have been impactful for me, but it's also good to say for a young high school kid who's trying to win the state championship that it's not just looking at the sending order list, it's listening to your coach and holding yourself accountable to his standards too.
So let's talk for the younger athletes and also for, I mean, anybody can really relate to this. I think we see sometimes where athletes will go to a meet, we've talked about this, an environment meet where it's fun. And we've talked about before, oh, your grandma's behind the ring and you got your cookies from her after and you slept in your bed the night before and it was so awesome and so great. And then you go to the state meet and you're throwing a meter less than you threw at that home meet with all that good energy or whatever the case is. And I think the same thing, you can think of it on the highest level for you. It's okay, go to the Olympics and whether or not it's raining, it's like the numbers across the board aren't even close to what they were to be like the season's best. So how do we help athletes to understand, or how do we put into perspective for other people why we don't even assume that it's really ever going to be a season's best necessarily at the Olympic Games, where your body should be the freshest. You obviously put all your eggs in that basket. It's the most important meet of the year. What things are going on from a focus perspective that historically make it to be a situation where people aren't necessarily throwing their farthest, even though they all want to?
Yeah, I think you're certainly capable of it happening. It's just really rare unless it's a round 6 and you've already kind of won the competition. Just because these majors are unlike any other competition, right? Even the Diamond League is very athlete friendly. Like you can kind of get a lot of warm-ups. There's only 8 guys. You get guaranteed 5 throws. If they're doing the final 3, then you get another last round. It's kind of maybe a little cushiony, right? And as they should be, because they're an exhibition. It's a show of the sports talent, right? But the way that a major works when you're warming outside the stadium and you got to get there and you're credentialing and all these kind of it's a pain. It's a huge pain. And anybody who's watched a major, the behind the scenes is just a lot of steps to get there. It's a lot of hurry up and wait. You get to the call room, you walk to the call room. You walk this far, you stand in there, they check the bags. It's a lot of
So
logistics.
so it's more it's like a production
Yes.
rather than a meet, meaning like so to make people kinda like draw a parallel here, a Diamond League meet would be like a meet you guys would go to where there's a championship style meet, meaning like there's 8 or 9 people, everyone's getting 6 throws pretty much. You get to kinda warm up for as long as you want. If you say, "Hey, ref, 1 more," they'll let you get 1 more, like, it can be kinda nice, a lot of them. Some
Well,
of them are not exactly like that, right?
sure.
Some of them are street comps, like, it and
Rome
like
won't let you warm up,
well,
right?
and that's the thing though, like you never really know. Okay, here's what we do know. We always know that the majors are gonna be more about okay, I don't wanna say more about, that's not fair. The major is on a time schedule that is 99% of the time gonna be based off of TV,
Mhm.
okay? And so, no one really cares if Joe wanted to do another stand throw when NBC's got the camera ready,
Sure.
right? It's time to go when it's time to go. And even, like, if you think about we've had some meets I mean, I a meet that comes to my mind is World in Eugene, the amount of time we were waiting in between throws in Eugene was the longest wait time in between throws I've ever seen in the history of any track meet I've ever been to. And I think there wasn't there some reason they have a new
Yeah,
measuring system
they were
or
using the new, camera measuring system, which took at least a minimum of 1 minute to complete and calibrate itself. So they weren't using the laser, they were using the camera, and because of that, it literally was the longest
so which is all well and
competition.
fine and good, but the point of that is you don't know what you're gonna get. Even when we think we know, right, how things are gonna be, like, for an example, and I'll just throw this story out there, kinda, like, put myself under the bus a little bit on this. Doha, okay? We were trying to kind of figure out how we wanted to warm up outside the stadium, okay? Really hot in Doha. Anybody that was there knows that. The thing that a lot of people might not understand about Doha was the inside of the stadium, like the competition stadium, was air conditioned, which is insane. Like what outdoor facility do you know that's air conditioned? Well, Doha was. But outside the stadium was not air conditioned. So we were trying to think of how we wanted to like keep Joe's body fresh. He had the prelim and then he had the final. And not to get too deep into the weeds, but he was sick. He had a fever. Okay. And we were trying to figure out how we could just get in and get out of the prelim unscathed. Okay. So I was the men's team coach for USA, but I was also out watching the women. So the day before I'm watching the women and I'm like, I have a timer set on like how many throws they're getting, how many, is it going to be by time warm up inside the stadium or is it going to be by number of throws? Meaning like, are they going to give you guys 30 minutes or are they going to give you guys each 2 throws inside the stadium? Okay. Well, they did it off time for the women, both flights A and B. So then what happened was for flight A for the men, they did it off time, but then because it was prime time then, for B, they did it by number of throws, which I don't know if they're allowed to do that or not. I was under the impression that like whatever you did with the one flight, you had to do with the next flight, but regardless, I thought you were going to get more throws than you did, and you only got 2 warm-ups, and we didn't warm outside the stadium. So I'm ready to lose it because like I had told you something that didn't end up being right, and you had to just kind of do it. Thankfully, your first throw landed on the ribbon. Like literally, I think you were the 12th person in. You took one throw that hit the line, so you had an auto qualifier for the prelim, but like clearly we weren't expecting that. So my point of that is you don't really know what you're going to get warming up for these meets until it's happening. So to be able to have the flexibility to understand how to be ready no matter what the format is, what you need to focus on to be ready to go when boom it's time to go. And I think I seriously think as a college coach, the thing that the athletes were worst at was being able to do it now. They don't like that. You wanna be able to do what you need to do, get your arms, do your thing, have your theme song playing, have your warm-up go how you want. The second it's not going how you want it to go, the wheels fell off, okay? And so as a professional, to be a good professional, you need to know how to not do that, right? How to be ready to go, "Alright, you're up. Go. Right now, do it." And I think that you've proven to be able to find a way to get that done. So what's the secret there?
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, when you're bringing up all these different things about getting it done, like, I think the way people practice, the way people get prepare, people talk about the word arena skills, right?
Right.
Like I've never heard my pump up song come on at a world championship, at a USA final. So like we purposely train in an environment that is very, boring, or it's worse than it will be than it'll be in the stadium. And I think that's one of those things when you're prepared for not having the things you want. When you do have anything you want, only a cherry on top.
So the thing that comes to mind when you say that, we had an athlete that was training with us, a professional and a good professional. And the athlete wanted to play music and do some stuff at practice. And we were just like, we don't do that. Right.
Yeah,
And I was like, we're not going to do that. We're not going to be listening to we don't do that. We don't listen to music. This isn't the club. We don't do that here. And it's like the athlete basically said, so you're just like left to the thoughts in your head all practice. And I'm like, you're always only left to the thoughts in your own head. And that's the thing that messes people up sometimes. When the thoughts in your head are going well and they're good, positive thoughts, it can be good. When
yeah.
you're thinking the wrong things, it's
When vibes
bad.
are great.
Yeah, when vibes are
Yeah,
exactly. But
it's easy to keep the when the boulder is going downhill the right way. It's easier to just keep that going, right?
right.
But when things aren't, that's when the reality hits in, and that's why I
But
think
that's the whole point. That needs to be trained. The thoughts you're thinking when things aren't going your way is something that is a trainable part of this sport. And if you don't train it, you're subject to whatever just pops into your head when things aren't going well. And I've seen that ruin a lot of people. And I'm sure you have too.
sure. Well, I think too. I think especially when I think about majors and the thoughts in the head. I also think with qualifying rounds and all these kind of things, when people have taken things too lightly, or they try to be too cute, or they try to be too relaxed, because they're able to do that in a setting that they're comfortable in, right? So when they're at, maybe vibes at practice or things are going well, you can kind of just like, oh, I just techniqued one out there really at this level. It's good enough. But I've also seen people not make past the qualifying round who were certainly capable of it because their environment wasn't giving them vibes. And then they were trying to technique it and kind of be cute out there rather than just getting the job done and bringing some heat.
Well, I think that reminds me of a situation we're kind of dealing with now. It's like you have these athletes that were dominant in high school, and then they go to college and they can't do the things that they did in high school to be dominant anymore. Meaning, like, say you're a girl and you threw 50 feet in high school and you could throw 42 feet on your first throw, and you know for sure you're getting five more throws. Okay, you throw 42 feet, you even throw 50 feet at half the meets you go to in college anymore, and you're not going to make the final. So this idea, and this is something that just makes me go nuts, when coaches let their kids do stand throws to make the final. Like, if I ever see a kid doing that I was recruiting, I'm not recruiting you for long, because it's training all the wrong things. First of all, it tells me that you don't have enough confidence that you can make it, you can find a way to get it done with an actual technique. Number two, you will never, ever, 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 ever be able to take a stand throw and make a final of any meet of consequence as a collegiate. And don't even get me started about as a professional. So you see these athletes that had really good college careers. They were the best in their conference. Maybe they were one of the best in the NCAA. Then you start competing professionally, and now your best is like barely middle of the pack. And that messes with you so bad, because now you take a throw that's a little bit off your PR and you're like, oh my gosh, like I basically have to throw my PR to make this final. How am I going to do that? And you've never thought about it. You've never had to do that before. So your focus goes from you to everyone else, everything else. The focus shifts. You take it out of your own control, and now you're completely lost.
Yeah, I think that's that scenario training and being in those circumstances, they're super impactful, right? Because there's having two fouls and needing a throw of not just like one to make the final, like you said, you're a 50-footer and all you got to throw is 38 to get a couple more because you're in high school. Like if you need a throw of consequence and you have two fouls, like it comes down to that one. Like if you're not prepared for that to happen, you can't expect.
Well, let's just think about it this way. When we talk about this percentage of PR, right? So you've thrown 23 meters, okay? 23. For you to have to make a throw at 2250.
Mhm.
It's not like if you say you had 2 fouls or say you'd thrown 21 and you need to throw 2250 in round 3. That's that's almost a meter off your PR. But is that something that's just a walk in the park for you or anyone else in this whole entire world to be able to do? Absolutely not. It's not. That is not a walk in the park throw. It's not in that 2250 is not a throw that's just, "Oh, I got that easily no matter what happens," for anybody, right? And you've thrown 2250 a million times.
Not a million,
I
but
mean, you've
enough.
literally thrown
In
22 meters
practice,
in
sure,
sure,
sure.
but you've literally thrown 22 meters in a track and field meet with the tape measure 100 times.
Sure, sure,
But
sure.
even still, if you're throwing 21 meters and you're having a rough day, it's not like 22 is just like nothing.
No, it's
It's
not.
not like it's nothing, but you've done that so many times that your your willingness to be able to feel that you can pull that out is definitely higher than pretty much everybody in the world, right? But that's because of the volume of throws you have at that level. So I think that people have to understand that you have to have a general idea of what you need to do to make that baseline throw. And if you don't have any idea of how that has to happen, you don't have enough focus on what you're doing to find that, like, it's gonna catch up with you. It's 100% gonna catch up with you.
Yeah, I mean, you're 100% correct, and I think that's something that, like, you can go back to. I mean, those moments where you're in the squeeze, like, I can think of those when I had the squeeze in high school, and that's a long time ago in my career, right? Those squeeze moments of when you have to find a way to make something happen are those moments are impactful, and it might not even be track, right? You can think about a football when you something had to happen this play, right? When you have to kinda demand yourself to make something happen, those moments obviously are big, they defy you and how you're gonna think about them in the future, but I think they also make you rely on the things you trust, right? When you talk about your confidence about driving on the road and
Yeah.
compared to a Formula 1 driver, right? Those are the things of, like, when you said I throw 22 that many times, it's it's more common, right? It's less of a, "Oh my gosh, how do I do it? Because I did it the one time," right? That's why we talk a lot about raising your minimum level up, because you wanna have as many as those types of throws in the bank, because that's how you actually cash in when you really need to.
Exactly. I mean, I think that everybody has this thing that they go back to when they're in a corner, and everybody has a different, like, an X factor, right? And so understanding, like, what you need to pull back to just get back to baseline to make a throw is something that is highly valuable at every single level. And I think that, like, having for me, a lot of this boils down to, like, self-awareness and being a little bit more self-actualized than maybe you were at other points in your life to know, like, this is what I do when I get stressed. This is how I react when I feel like I'm in a bad position. And this isn't just like a track thing. I think that everybody, you can relate to this in any aspect of your life. Like, how do you behave when things get challenging? Right. And to not take some inventory on that and then ask yourself, why do I react this way when things get to be hard? Right? It's the freeze, what is it? Fight, flight, or freeze, like everybody kind of has a different way of handling that squeeze, as we call it, right? So when your body starts telling you, okay, we got a problem, how do you react? And how do you wish you would react differently than maybe you do? And I think that that's where having a good coach or being a little bit more in tune with yourself goes a really long way, and that's how you mature as an athlete. So somebody that's been in this as long as like your maturation in the sport shows because you have been in all those different situations. Like, there's not one situation that you could be in that you haven't been in before at this stage in your career. And like somebody else, like for an example, like you've been a champion. You've won a world championship, right? You've been number 1 in the world. You've been number 1 in the United States. Like, you've been to all these different heights, and then you haven't been, right? And so you've learned how to kinda, like, be on top, come down a little bit, come back up, and not everybody has had those experiences. So that kind of, like, levels you up in a sense just from going through it, Just like it's just like there's so much premium to experience, right? And I think that as you get older, you should be able to understand what you need to focus on to be at your best position to do things at a high level. And so I think for me, the last thing I'd like to touch on with this topic is just how do you focus emotionally when so many things are happening? I think a good example would be obviously, we had kids, and I think that there's nothing more that changes life more than having kids, right? So, how do you feel like I said in the beginning of this podcast, your focus from, all right, I'm at the Olympic Training Center, all I have to do is focus on myself. All right, well, now I'm married and my wife is a coach, and I'm balancing like her stuff and my stuff, and now we have a family and we're doing this. Like, how do you feel like you've been able to balance this emotionally? Because we hear stuff with people like, you're going through personal things or something happens or you have a lot on your plate, and it's like we've talked about before, no one cares how much you have on your plate. The only thing anybody's really judging you off of for this sport is how far you throw. So when you know that you're still being judged the same way, whether you have everything on your plate or nothing on your plate, how have you been able to focus as your life has changed so much since you started your career to now?
I think the focus part of that is kind of deciding who's judging you on your plate. I think there's an early part of my career where I think it was the external judgment, maybe some internal, and like that's the outcome. For me, as we get to this point in my career, the internal, like who's judging what we're doing, it's just like, well, I don't know, I am now, and I'm proud of the way we're doing it and the way that we're able to spend time with our kids and like, yeah, am I training sometimes earlier or is a faster transition than maybe might be ideal, right? But what is ideal? Like ideal for our family work-life balance, this is ideal, right? Ideal for the way the train and only think about the shot put. Well, I kind of did that when I was at the Olympic Training Center. So it's not like a stone that I wonder if I only ever thought about throwing, what that life would be like. Because luckily I had the opportunity to do that. If I didn't, maybe there'd be more of a sense of wonder, where like I went to bed thinking about throwing. I don't do that anymore. Maybe it would be good if I did sometimes, but like that wonder of that extreme I've had. So when I'm at this extreme where I'm not completely checked out, obviously that's my job to throw far, but the focus to have extreme focus on what the task at hand, whether it's playing with our kids, doing stuff with them. And then the second that, you take them and, they're getting, somebody's going to watch them for our practice while we're here. And like, I'm going to warm up. That transition time for me is what I'm proud that I'm getting pretty good at, of like mentally, not just physically warming up, but mentally being able to focus on what do I need to execute today? And kind of like when I was in that ultra focus, when I only thought about the shot put, I wanted to master everything at one time, right? I wanted everything to chase the perfect throw that day. And I think at this point in my career, I'm able to focus on, obviously a higher level than I was then, but like I need to make sure at least these two things are corrected from the last practice so I can make the next practice better. And I'm seeing the progress, the ladder of it.
Well, I mean, now, like, politely challenge you on that a little bit because I do think that even like last year, you there were days you went to bed thinking about the shot put because you talked about it the last thing you said before you went to bed, or you woke up and the first thing you said. I think there are points of the year where it is on your mind more, and it should be, right? Like if we're getting ready to go to the Olympics, I would assume that you'd be thinking about the shot put more than you are in January when we're barely throwing it all. And I think that that's part of that maturation that you have after all these years where you already just basically said it, like, you know how to transition now. And I don't think that thinking about it at such an aggressive level is healthy for 365 days a year. But I do think that you, from what I see, you know how to flip the switch faster and more efficiently now than you even did in 2018, the first year that I ever saw you in the sport.
No, I mean, that's obviously, I hope I'm better at it because I mean, I have to be. I think I've proven that through our life and the decision we're making. But yeah, the big thing for focus for me when I think about myself and I think about like if somebody's asking me my advice, right? Whether they're a college athlete, they're a high school athlete, like how do I focus better? And I think the best focus for me is not ignoring the things that you're overlooking, right? And that's like whether it's something as simple as like the warm up, something as simple as opening up your body, something as simple as like, people will debate, do you need a big stand throw? You don't need a big stand throw. I don't know, but like maybe if you just threw it farther than you did all last month and you keep doing that all this next month, I bet you things are going in the right direction, right? Like if you just focus on having some kind of target in front of you, whether it's the throwing, the lifting, your body weight, your composition, you need to pick a target and then go after it. And like otherwise you don't have focus. There's a book I read that was talking about like everybody's mind's like a guided missile, right? But if it doesn't know where to go, it
Right.
doesn't know how to correct
Exactly.
and how to alter itself.
Yeah, like, there's no intention, and I think that's something we've talked about today. It's what is the intention of the day? What is the focus of the day? And all these little goals for every single throw, every single movement you're doing, all they do is just keep stacking up like a Russian doll to make your product. And it's not just the technical, and it's not just the physical, it's all encompassing by all the things, even the emotional things. That's who you are. You are what you do every single day, every single throw, every single practice. So you need to judge yourself off of that. You don't judge yourself off the one bad practice you have. You don't judge yourself off the one great practice you have. You don't judge yourself off of the one great meet you have or the one bad meet you have. Like you are a combination of all the things that you do. And I've always kind of felt like people say that whole like don't judge me thing. It's like, well, all you ever really have to compare somebody off of like what you think they're going to do is what they've kind of done in the past. So unless you're going to change what you've done in the past to kind of make a new, people are going to assume or you're going to kind of be what you've been unless you make a change and make a shift. And I think that what you're focusing on becomes what you are, right? You literally become what you focus on and what you're doing intentionally every single day.
Yeah, I think that's important to say, and I think that's a good way to kind of wrap everything up is because your focus comes down to intention, right? Your intention of what you're going to do, whether once you wake up out of bed, right? What is the purpose of today? And you know, we talked about earlier, going to bed thinking about the shop at night, right? It is what you are intending to do. So if you are going to bed thinking about what you need to do in throwing practice, you're probably going to have a better intent the next day of practice. If you're going to bed thinking about what you need to do with your kids, it's probably a good thing because the next day you're going to be doing what you need to do with your kids. But all of that is kind of added up. I think everything will, you know, one of the common things that people have been listening, we talked about strength as like a Russian doll that kind of keeps on building upon itself. I think focus is the same thing, that your intentions of what you want to have happen, what you want to grow with, what your goal, you know, whatever that end result that you're kind of chasing, the intentions, what do you always say? Your actions reflect your,
Yeah, like do your actions reflect your goals? So,
and like that's important to say because I think that really is probably the definition of focus to me because if your actions aren't reflecting your goal, don't talk to me about focus and distraction and where your mind is because your actions are more important than where your mind is, right? If you put your body in the right positions possible, your mind will start kind of craving doing it more and more and more. And I think one of those things is you have to put yourself in situations where your focus isn't there, and that's how you learn to be good at it.
yeah, I agree 100%. And I think, from a family perspective too, and as a mom, I don't think that anybody's better at focusing on task at hand than like a person that has to deal with their kids all day, right? Because there are so many things going on all the time and so many things that have to get done, like in the house or with them, that you have to learn how to do this at this time, that at that time, that at that time, and be organized with what you're focusing on. And if you get too far out on anything, you're missing something that's right in front of you. So I think that life kind of teaches you where your focus needs to be, and it needs to be intentional, it needs to be focus driven, and that's kinda how you get better at organizing your day and your time, and your mind gets more clear because everything is more efficient.
Yeah, and I think one of those things that's compounding, like you have the athletes who, luckily I've been at the Olympic Training Center where I saw more than just track athletes. And like, there's obviously phases to everybody's personal journey as an athlete, but like one of the things I always think about is the athletes who are tracking their calories, right? You can see them in the cafeteria. There is a focus going on in what they're doing, right? There's a focus in their intent of what they're doing to their body in every single way, right? Then you have the athletes who I see in the training room, whether they're not actually there for rehab, they're there for prehab because they're so ultra focused on making sure that maybe whatever happened to them in the past doesn't happen again, or that ankle sprain or whatever it was, or that hit they took when they're playing rugby. Like that ultra focus of kind of having the attention to detail before things happen, preventing the fire is probably the most impactful focus in all the different realms of it. There's probably a bunch of realms of, oh, I just want to throw farther. I'm going to focus on that. but like the ultra focus is probably the one who's really, really, really attention to detail about putting out those little things, those little nags and getting ahead of them. That's probably the, in my stage of my career when I've had that mindset, and it's not like you just flip the switch and say, tomorrow I'm going to focus. But when you kind of get that hunger to have the no stone unturned mentality, that's where the excitement focus comes from. And I think that's where I've seen myself and other athletes who've gotten to a really high level really kind of make a huge jump.
Yeah. I mean, I think that a lot of the training stuff boils down to discipline and being disciplined about the things that you're focusing on is really important. And I think it can take you a really long way. If you're just letting everything kind of come as it comes and it's unorganized and scattered, like that's not how you become great. And so I think, for me, I think we've done a pretty good job kind of covering a lot of the discussion around focus today. And I think that this time of the year is like a really pivotal time where everyone's kind of seeing where everybody's focus is at. So as we kind of go forward, I think that you're going to kind of see the focus shifting from some of the things that we're doing right now and kind of like the last phase of the base training, get into the competition season and moving forward into the season. You're opening up in about a month. So
Yeah. And then probably the next time if you guys have been watching along the way, the next time won't be in Hawaii. So we'll be a little bit sad about not the enjoying this warm weather, but we'll be excited to get back home, kind of flip the switch. We have some fun things happening around our house that we're going to get some good training environments, good training area for. So we're super excited to get back home. But of course, we're enjoying the last couple of days we have here in Hawaii.
definitely. Well, I think this has been a good one. And I hope you guys enjoy it. Make sure that you press the subscribe button if you have, and we hope to get you guys more content, more podcasts coming out soon.
And more products coming soon. All right. Thank you guys for listening. This is the THROvacs Podcast. We're throwing in the Kovacs family Clyde.